Somewhere deep beneath the earth, the tomb of the greatest military commander in human history has completely vanished. By the time he died at just 32 years old, his empire stretched from Greece all the way to India. He achieved this scale of conquest because he was subjected to intense physical conditioning from childhood. Back in Macedonia, his tutors pushed him to his limits in combat and cavalry tactics. When he was only 10 years old, a trader brought in a wildly unmanageable horse named Bucephalus. While grown men failed to control the animal, the young boy calmly approached and turned the horse to face the sun, hiding its terrifying shadow. He then mounted and rode it effortlessly. While his body was hardened for war, his mind was sharpened by the most famous philosopher of the ancient world. King Philip hired Aristotle to serve as his son's private tutor, teaching him logic, art, and religion, alongside the royal children, who would one day become his top generals. The ultimate source of his drive, however, came directly from his father, King Philip II. After watching his 10-year-old son tame Bucephalus, Philip delivered a mandate that would define the boy's entire existence. He told him to go find a kingdom worthy of himself, because Macedonia was simply too small for him. Macedonia had produced a highly engineered weapon, programmed from childhood to believe he was destined to rule everything he saw. That weapon was abruptly unleashed on the world when Alexander was 20 years old. During a public wedding celebration, one of King Philip's own bodyguards drew a blade and assassinated him on the spot. Overnight, a massive power vacuum opened up. Alexander was suddenly the king, but his position was incredibly fragile. Because his mother was from Epirus, many elites viewed him as a half-Macedonian impostor. Smelling blood in the water, rival political factions maneuvered to replace him, while newly conquered Greek territories, like the powerful city-state of Thebes, immediately launched violent rebellions. Alexander answered this instability with staggering brutality. He hunted down and executed his domestic rivals, including his own family members. Then he marched 3,000 soldiers straight to Thebes and completely obliterated the city, slaughtering thousands to ensure no Greek state would dare defy him. With his throne secured and Greece terrified into absolute submission, Alexander left his homeland behind. He took an army of 40,000 men and pointed them east, toward the wealthiest, most formidable superpower of the ancient world, the Persian Empire. By immediately purging his own bloodline and erasing a historic city from the map, he established a clear operational philosophy. He would prioritize his own absolute control over human life, laying a blood-soaked foundation for the global conquest that followed. Crossing into Asia, Alexander's army faced a sheer mathematical nightmare. The Persian forces defended their home turf, routinely outnumbering the invading Greeks by massive margins. At the Granicus River, Alexander faced a fortified Persian defensive line. He organized his cavalry into a concentrated wedge-shaped assault to violently pierce the enemy center. Fighting at the spear's tip, he survived an axe blow, collapsing the Persian lines for a Greek victory. His genius extended far beyond open battlefields. When the island fortress of Tyre refused to surrender, its massive stone walls and violent ocean barrier seemed totally impenetrable. Alexander simply ordered his exhausted men to spend 7 long months dumping thousands of tons of rock into the sea, engineering a massive land bridge so his siege towers could roll to the gates. The true test of his tactical dominance arrived at Gaugamela. Facing King Darius III, Alexander neutralized scythed chariots and war elephants by creating deliberate gaps in his infantry lines, trapping the beasts, and eventually forcing the Persian king to flee the battlefield in total panic. Time and again, he cracked the hardest military puzzles the ancient world could offer. By consistently annihilating larger, better-equipped armies, he transitioned from a heavy underdog into a devastating force of nature, quietly fueling a dangerous belief in his own invincibility. As the Persian forces retreated, Alexander marched into Egypt. Rather than fighting him, the Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator. They crowned him a pharaoh and officially declared him a son of God. He heavily leaned into this divine status. The propaganda of his empire physically shifted to match his massive ego, with royal currency explicitly depicting Alexander wearing the sacred ram's horns of Ammon, projecting his image as a living deity to millions. Soon after, he captured the capitals of Persepolis and Babylon. The treasuries were completely looted, making Alexander master of the wealthiest empire on the planet. But his ambition offered no off-switch. He forced his men further east, dragging them all the way into India to wage an incredibly brutal war against King Porus in the Punjab region. Here, thousands of miles from home, the harsh reality of biology finally caught up with him. Battered by endless combat and extreme weather and immense casualties, his army staged a mutiny. They flatly refused to take another step forward. No enemy empire, no fortified wall, or war elephant ever managed to stop his momentum. The only thing capable of halting his war machine was the absolute breaking point of human endurance within his own ranks. Forced to turn around, Alexander's psychological state began to deteriorate rapidly. As they marched back through conquered territories, he grew deeply paranoid, convinced that the men surrounding him were plotting his downfall. He also started adopting Persian customs, wearing their traditional clothing and demanding his subjects bow to him in the Persian style. This deeply alienated his traditional Greek generals, who despised these foreign habits and felt their king was slipping away from them. His behavior became violently erratic. He executed several of his own loyal officers over accusations of corruption and treason. Then, in an attempt to forcibly weld his empire together, he organized a ceremony in Susa, making his top Greek generals marry Persian noblewomen en masse. Retreating to the high walls of Babylon, he descended into relentless cycles of heavy drinking and wild partying. Even as his physical health strained, his mind remained restless, obsessively drafting new military plans to launch a naval invasion of Arabia. Without a new enemy to focus his energy on, his restless aggression began targeting his own court. Between the execution of his officers and his spiral into alcoholism, it became clear that his ambition required a war to sustain itself, and in its absence, it was consuming the man himself. Following a long night of heavy drinking, Alexander stumbled into his quarters and collapsed. A sudden, severe fever took hold of his body. For 12 days, he lay incapacitated as his physicians tried every medicine available, but nothing worked. In June of 323 BC, he took his final breath. He was only 32 years old. The sudden death of a king in his prime sent a paralyzing shockwave across the ancient world. The decade of conquest forced a fusion of Greek philosophy, Persian administration, and Eastern traditions, creating a cultural blend that outlasted the empire itself. But the stability of this enormous territory relied entirely on the gravitational pull of his own ego. Without him, there was no solid political structure to hold it together, and his empire immediately violently shattered into competing kingdoms, ruled by his former friends. He was raised to be a weapon, and he performed exactly as designed. He possessed the sheer tactical brilliance required to conquer the known world, but ultimately lacked the capacity to conquer his own ambition.